Iran is at a breaking point as the nation faces its most volatile moment in years. As protests rage across the country, the supreme leader is striking back. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei remains defiant and unapologetic, vowing that he'll not back down. On the 13th day of demonstrations, he struck a defiant tone in a national address, lashing out at US President Donald Trump, branding him as arrogant and telling him to mind his own business.
Because he has said that if the Iranian government does something, I will come and take your side. If they know their own country, they will be proud of their country. In their own countries, there are many sins. He has the blood of more than 1,000 Iranians in his hands. In the Battle of Dawaz al-Ruza, thousands of our comrades, other than leaders, scholars, and adults, were martyred.
Well, turning his fire inward, Khamenei accused sections of the protesters of rioting to please Trump. He went even further, predicting that the arrogant US leader would be overthrown, just like the imperial dynasty was toppled during Iran's 1979 revolution. Khamenei's address comes after protests spread across all 31 provinces, including more than 100 cities. The protests intensified after exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi urged Iranians to flood the streets, a call answered by the demonstrators. The unrest soon turned violent. In eastern Tehran, protesters torched a government building, cheering and chanting anti-government slogans. Well, the message from the streets is unmistakable. Demonstrators are openly demanding the fall of the regime and sweeping systemic change, what they call a fight to reclaim freedom and dignity. As night fell, the government, under President Masoud Pezeshkian, imposed a sweeping digital blackout, cutting internet access and international calls. He urged utmost restraint amid the nationwide clashes driven by soaring living costs. He also called for dialogue, engagement, and listening to the people's demands while avoiding violent behavior. Well, the crisis has drawn sharp international attention. US President Donald Trump has claimed that Khamenei is looking to flee, warning that the situation is, in his words, getting very bad. Well, it's worth mentioning that the protesters are being backed by the United States. Some of them directly appealed for support. And earlier, Trump had threatened to strike Iran if more peaceful protesters are killed. Meanwhile, Iranian officials have accused America of interference and worsening the situation. Following Trump's threat, Iran has struck a defiant tone, but says it is ready for talks.
We don't want war, but we are ready for war. We are also ready for negotiations, but only negotiations that are based off mutual interest and respect.
According to a US-based human rights activist news agency, the unrest has turned deadly, with at least 42 killed and more than 2,270 detained so far, as Iran tightens its grip amid the escalating situation. Tehran's economic outcry began on December 28th when shopkeepers hit the streets over the currency's freefall. With the Rial at record lows, inflation nearly 40%, and sanctions tightening the noose, anger spilled beyond markets. University students joined the protests, and unrest quickly spread to cities across Iran. Well, Iran is holding its breath, and the protesters defying fear, power pushing back, and global tensions closing in. Tehran now stands at a crossroads between reform and repression, or a far more dangerous confrontation ahead. Well, for more on this, we're joined now by Dr. Farzan Sabat, Managing Researcher at the Geneva Graduate Institute, joining us live from Geneva in Switzerland. Welcome to the program. So give us some perspective, if you will. How serious are these protests compared to protests we've seen in the past in Iran?
Hi, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. Listen, I think they're quite serious, and I would argue much more serious. Going back to, let's say, December 2017, January 2018, we've had 4 rounds of these anti-regime mass demonstrations happening. The triggers for each of them may have been different. Some were more focused on the economy, some more kind of society and culture, like the Women Life Freedom protests in 2022. But all of them have clearly shown one thing. The trigger starts in one way, but because the system is fundamentally unable to address those concerns, they quickly escalate into anti-regime protests, which explicitly call for the downfall of the regime. A trend we've noted is that since December 2017, January 2018, the first round of these protests, they've grown significantly in geographic coverage, in size, as well as in their radicalism and in their demands for change. One aspect I would note that I think is qualitatively different about this round of protest is that in the previous Women Life Freedom protest, mainly in the last quarter of 2022, there was no clear leadership figure. I think during this round of protests, a clear leadership figure for the opposition has emerged, and that allows for a substantively higher level of both organization within the opposition as well as social mobilization within Iran.
Okay, I mean, you mentioned the system there. The Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei has addressed the public. What do you make of what he's said?
Listen, this is a speech that any Iran watcher or Iran analyst could have written with their eyes closed from memory, right? What he's signaling to the Iranian audience, to his own ruling system, as well as to a broader international audience, is that nothing has changed. There's no willingness to change. Ayatollah Khamenei, going back a long time, has always believed that bending to pressure and allowing reforms to take place would create a kind of process that could and probably would lead to the collapse of the regime. This is how he views the Shah's willingness to concede to the revolution as leading to the collapse of the kind of imperial state of Iran of the Pahlavi dynasty. This is how he also views the collapse of the Soviet Union under Mikhail Gorbachev. And in a sense, that's become a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? They haven't done the necessary gradual and structural reforms and changes they've needed to do. So the pressure and the pressure on the system has increased, and its resilience has gone down. Each time the crisis gets worse and worse, and the system is less ready to meet it. And now, if he does bend to pressure, if he does make those changes, it's very possible that the system could still collapse.
So given what you say then, what do you make of US President Donald Trump's interjections here? How does that play into this? And is that helpful or not?
I think President Trump's intervention on last Friday was very, very influential. What he basically said is that if protesters, I think he used the term innocent protesters, were killed, that the U.S. would effectively militarily intervene. Now, that's not necessarily being read as a strict red line, but it is a red line. And given the track record of U.S. actions, whether it's towards Iran or, let's say, a country like Venezuela, the events in Venezuela reinforce the credibility of that threat. And so what that has done is it's put the Islamic Republic in a very difficult position. If the crackdown on protesters and the ensuing massacres exceed a certain threshold, it could result in U.S. military action that's even further destabilizing for the system. On the other hand, if it limits itself to containment and doesn't undertake a harsh crackdown, then what happens is that protesters will become emboldened and they'll increase in size and intensity. So with the comments that he's made, he's essentially placed the Islamic Republic in a classic Goldilocks dilemma, where getting the response just right will be quite difficult.
Dr. Farzan Sabet, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me.
The world doesn't fit in boxes, so why should your news? From battlefields to negotiation tables, from internet outrage to real-world injustice. The conversations everyone is having and the ones they're avoiding. It's the same show, but this new year, Firstpost America gets a new look. I'm Kerry Johnston, and this is Firstpost America.